Hi, Lloyd, Robert, and Michael. You asked some really great questions, and Lloyd asked if there was an intervention on what I'd do to address the shear force issues, and Robert asked how to address probably the right foot mechanic issues, and then Michael asked a really great question. Does not only with the shear force problems he has with his foot mechanics, applying the shear forces, would the core training that he's doing, would that contribute to the coiling? I'll answer Michael's question first, and that sort of leads into the intervention I do. Essentially, yeah, the current problem he's got with shearing to the ground, okay, yeah, and if he's training, just say he's not working on his legs, he's just focused on his core, and he increases the rate of contraction, sure, that could contribute by all means. However, if you fixed up his foot mechanics and fixed up his shear forces, well, no, again, because he could apply more force to the ground, and then he'd get a small counter torque, and like I said before, when you push, apply force to the ground, and I can apply more force this way, and then the ground pushes back at me, and then pushes back again, you'd only get a counter torque, and it wouldn't occur as much. So no, not really. In addition, to add on to what you're saying with that though, because of that problem that he's got with his shear forces, also you'd find that if he was doing any leg work, that you'd find that that'd be a problem too. So not only when you squat, it increases vertical forces, well, essentially should shear the ground as well. And because he's got this problem, it also translates into how he sort of be training in the gym as well. So if he was training his legs to get stronger, also what they'd do is he'd apply more vertical force, and it'd increase his hip rotation as well. Okay, so then the muscle would stretch and then increase his rate of contraction. So that could be another issue as well, for sure, by all means. However, if you fixed up his foot mechanics and then taught him how to also, when he's squatting, essentially any good powerlifter, any good weightlifter, they know to shear the ground, okay, to apply more force to the ground, and then when you apply more force, the ground pushes back, and you can create more vertical force, and you can make the muscles contract faster and harder. A bit more complicated, but essentially you shear the force, you shear the ground, you apply shear forces when you powerlift or when you do Olympic weightlifting. In saying it, just depends on what core training he's doing though. You know, if he was doing hypertrophy training and doing like just maximal strength, where it's just like it's pushing a heavy weight, and it doesn't matter at what speed you're pushing at. What it would do is train the muscle to contract slower, so it could have a negative impact, but by all means we can see the amount of hip speed, certainly not the problem. So, but yeah, a valid point, it could be, but essentially it's mainly to do with his foot mechanics, the way he shears the ground. With Lloyd's question, what intervention would I do? First of all, and fix the foot mechanics. First thing I'd do is I'd measure him. With our system, we'd measure and the interaction with the ground, how the rate of stretch and shorten, so how he's using the muscles for each segment, and then the rotational, there's a summation speed or the rotational speeds of each segment, and look at that, how he's coordinating movement. You'd need to address how he's coordinating movement first by doing specific activity coordination trainings to teach him how to shear the ground. And then his foot mechanics, that's a tough one, because for all I know, it could have occurred that his arches in his feet didn't develop properly when he was a child. That takes a bigger intervention. There'd be myofascial pain syndrome, where what happens is you get the myosin, and it's like a piston, so you've got fibers on top, and you've got a thinner fiber that it acts like a piston. What happens is that when you get a flat foot, it causes your calves to become tight, also causes the hamstrings to be tight. So then it'd be contracted. So it's called myofascial pain syndrome. What you have to do is you have to release that off. So he'd need to address that. He'd then need to do a lot of PNF stretching. He'd need to see an osteo. what I'd do from there is, once I got that, shipped him off and got that sorted out, I'd focus on the posterior chain. And essentially when people got flat feet, essentially it's because the glutes aren't activating properly and the posterior chain issues. So I'd focus on that, I'd get the glutes, and then plus working on the calves, loosening them off, and then I'd work on his hamstrings as well, and I reckon he'd be really tight in the adductor magnus as well. So I'd build up the diaphragm, his foot, so start pumping, okay, and so he's plenty of tissue in here, would be really tight, which activates the calves, so be focused on getting restructuring the foot, and that'd be a combination of the posterior chain and doing it, and then creating mobility and flexibility. I'll start with some plyometrics ankle bounces and stuff like that over a period of time. The intervention just depends. I'd build it off the data. But essentially what I'd do is I'd also go even one step further and I'd work on his gait analysis. Yeah, I would. Because the thing is that if he's setting his pattern, every time he walks and he's used to, and the fascia set, you've also got the fascia and you have to break that. The anatomy train, they call it. That pattern be set. So when he walks, as soon as you treat him, he goes out the door and he starts walking, how many ever kilometers they walk a week, what it'd be, just say he walks 30 to 40 kilometers, maybe more, maybe 50. He's going to revert back to that old pattern. So even though you're treating him, you'd then be faced with that same issue. I'd also then address, like I said before, in the gym as well, of how he's also applying force to the ground, and how he's doing squats, how he's lifting, what core contraction training he's doing, training the muscles, and then I do specific activity coordination training, but also that for the gait, it's the same again, that how he's training in the gym, and then retraining his coordination patterns, because he'd have an asymmetry in his gait pattern. I'd make him more symmetric again, so that you don't keep on getting that snowballing effect. Okay, so the intervention on Rory, it's a question of how long's a piece of string. But what I'd do is gait, I'd measure his swing, and then I'd fix up his foot, and I'd really focus on his posterior chain. But the first thing I'd work on the posterior chain first, work on the gym, and then to translate that, I'd then do activity coordination training, where I'd actually train him how to I've got, we've done a lot of research on how to train athletes to push and pull against the ground, and train shear forces. But however, you've got to change the breakdown first before you can start then teaching people how to push and pull against the ground effectively. So it depends on when the breakdowns. Is it happening in the backswing? Does it happen at the beginning? Does it happen at the end? Does it happen during transition? Is it happening in the downswing? But I know there's stabilization and ground force issues at impact, and also know it's in transition. So there'd be two areas that you have to focus on. So they require different training. So it's sort of complicated on how I really go about it. It just depends on his data. And the biggest, hardest one is what works for Tom won't work for Harry. And then what works for them may not work for Fred. So the hard part is finding a training stimulus that works and that it creates adaptation to. So in all of this, the hard part is finding out what works best for that person, and it can take a period of time. It takes a little bit of trial and error to begin with. Okay, so even though I've got a bunch of exercises, there's a bunch of things that we've measured on how to train the ground, train the muscles, it doesn't work for every single person. So the hard part of all this intervention is finding the adaptations that work for him to create a training stimulus that's going to work best for Rory. Now, I hope it sort of answers your question, but it's sort of a tough one to answer. What would I do? I'd need to find out by measuring first, and then I could create an intervention. And then once I know how they react to the training stimulus and do all the above I spoke about before, then I'd work out what I'd do. It's just one of those things I don't know. It's like every time I test a person, they say, well, what sort of exercise will I have, or what sort of training I do? I say, hey, I don't know until we look at the data and we analyse it, we sit down and look at it. Look at the physical limitations, look at the breakdowns in coordination, the sequential timing issues, what adaptations you do to a training stimulus and whatever. So it's not as easy as what people think. If people say, oh, you just push this way along the ground, they're kidding themselves. Anyway, so guys, I hope that maybe answers your questions, and if you've got any more, please ask. I'm happy to help you. And I thought I'd do the video because it's a little bit easier and be a 3-page essay to try and explain this. Okay then guys, thank you.